Danny Jawenko, a top European controlled demolition expert, cited, this is a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Without a doubt, it's professional work. Hugo Bachmann, structural engineer emeritus in Switzerland, cited, this is controlled demolition. We have foreknowledge of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The BBC announced it, in fact, 20 minutes before it actually happened, at 5 o'clock, with Jane Stanley citing the 47-story Solomon Brothers building collapsed due to structural failure. Well, never before in history had a high-rise building collapsed due to structural failure from fires. And she's announcing it 20 minutes before it happened. Well, the BBC apologized for the mistake, citing the confusing events of the day. The firemen had pulled out all of their resources from the building early in the afternoon, and they're looking at each other wondering why they're not fighting the fire. And there's some people who are telling them the building's going to come down. Well, again, never before in history has a building come down. It's a high-rise, steel frame, fireproofed building come down. And there's hundreds of examples, by the way. For instance, in Caracas, Venezuela, the 56-story building burned for 17 hours over 26 floors. In Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 5 floors, the First Interstate Bank. In Philadelphia, the Meridian Plaza building burned 18 hours over 8 floors. And in New York, 50-story building, it burned for 6 hours. But these were large, long-lasting, and very hot fires. And every one of those buildings is in use today. What we're talking about is 2 or 3 small fires in World Trade Center 7, and it comes straight down symmetrically into its own footprint as a result. We don't think so. This is why we demand a new investigation of Congress with subpoena power. The gravitational kinetic energy available in the collapse of the 2 twin towers, for instance, has to account for one, the crushing of 80,000 tons of intact structural steel beneath it. 2, the production of molten metal, which we've talked about, tons of it. 3, the pulverization of concrete to a fine powder ranging from 10 to 100 microns in size, and some gravel. 4, the expansion of the pyroclastic dust clouds to 10 times the volume of the building. Now, the 100,000 kilowatt hour available gravitational potential in each tower cannot account for even one of these, let alone all 3. The collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2 is quite different. Architects and engineers are not trained with controlled demolition. We have to rely on the so-called experts. And these so-called experts are highly compromised due to their $10 million contracts, some of them. Therese McAllister, Gene Corley.
All of them. Everyone I've ever seen's got like
John Gross.
$3 million defense contracts, government contracts, I mean, all of them, although they were on federal boards. I mean, it's a joke.
At World Trade Center 1 and 2, we have the onset of destruction at the point of the jetliner impacts, because we're being led to believe that this was produced by fire. So what we have, instead of a classical controlled demolition of an implosion, we have an explosion where beams and columns are dismembered from each other. These are welded moment frame connections in the core structure of the World Trade Center 1 and 2. They're blown up to 500 feet laterally, impaling themselves in the surrounding windows. There's blast waves that blew out windows 400 feet away. There are bone fragments the size a half an inch, 700 of them found on the Deutsche Bank building across the street, on that building alone. Why are they so small? A gravitational collapse cannot account for that kind of a mechanism.
Can you break that down in layman's terms, that little fires in a building collapsing, it's going to be in a big pile, it's not going to be pieces of bone blown across the street on top of buildings? I mean,
these fires were on their way to going out. The South Tower was virtually out. Chief Oreo Palmer, in fact, reached the 78th floor stating, I can put it out with 2 lines, 2 small pockets of fires. So how did these small fires put 700 bone fragments on top of the Deutsche Bank building across the street? Bone fragments that small. A gravitational collapse would encase most of the bodies inside of it and taking it down. Of the 1,000 recorded interviews of first responders, we have 118 of them talking about explosions and flashes of light. This was only secured as a result of the New York Times suit against the city and won by the New York State Court of Appeals. Why were they trying to hide it? Because these 118 eyewitness accounts of explosions and flashes of light prior to the onset of collapse are key. At the North Tower, in the gaping hole left by the airplane, we have a woman waving for help. There's no raging inferno. So how can that fire that isn't even destroying most of the people in the building at the point of the jetliner impact hurl beams all of a sudden 500 feet laterally?
Again, the amount of energy in that fire, is it melting the humans? Is it burning the humans? Is it killing the humans? And then suddenly, right at the same point, exactly, this incredible Godzilla force is just ripping everything and blowing it sky high. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There's explosive force there and massive.
Now, I didn't say it as eloquently as you.
Incredible.
All right. Let's talk about the squibs at World Trade Center 1 and 2. 20, 40, and 60 stories below the ensuing collapse, we have sets of ejected building materials, which NIST calls puffs of air, due to the pile driver pushing down the building and creating these puffs of air down the elevator shafts and out. Well, first of all, they're not puffs of air, they're pulverized building materials. Second of all, these are explosive speeds of 100 to 200 feet per second. Third of all, there's no pile driver pushing down the building. In 4 seconds, the building mass above the point of impact is exploded and disintegrated and hurled laterally, such that after that about 4 seconds, the building's just pulling itself apart. You can see it very clearly in the videos once you look at it after you know what you're looking for. It took me 4 or 5 years to realize what was going on in the World Trade Center. It has to be explained, then you have to look at it, and then you go, aha! Also, if air was coming down the elevator shaft, filling the open space surrounding the core structure of the Twin Towers, it would fill that space uniformly and blow several windows out. It wouldn't be highly focalized explosions at the midpoint between the corners of the buildings. The science is very clear. These buildings, World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, were controlled demolitions. And there's been quite an effort on the part of the 9/11 Commission, the FEMA, and NIST to cover up this fact. And architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are demanding a new investigation, unimpeachable, with subpoena power for the U.S. Congress.
Richard, since you discovered this, since you found out that the official story is a fraud, how has this changed your life? How has this changed your worldview? I mean, how has this affected you?
Yeah. My life has been turned upside down by these revelations of the controlled demolitions, because the implications are far more disastrous than the demolitions themselves. Al-Qaeda didn't have access to these buildings. That can be assumed. That means somebody else did. Other than requiring a new investigation, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have to look at ourselves